Hey, it's Allan Dib. I recently leveled up my audio visual game, meaning I invested in a better camera, better microphone. I've set up a little bit of a recording studio here, and I just wanted to show you because I've had a lot of people asking me what camera I recommend, what audio, how I've been setting that up. A lot of people have noticed that I've leveled up my audio visual game, and so I wanted to show you a little bit about what I've done and why it's important. It's become so much more important now how you present yourself online. I'm invited to speak at virtual conferences, as a guest on podcasts. I'm launching my own podcast. So more and more people are hearing me and seeing me online. Now, I've seen so many times where someone is a well-known thought leader, they're maybe even very famous, and they're using this crappy little webcam that's on their computer. The audio crackles and it's really hard to hear them sometimes, or it echoes, or there's weird pops and things like that. And I think that's the equivalent of if you were showing up to speak at a conference, if you had a big stain on your shirt. Now, you might be a fantastic speaker, but that would distract the audience from your message. And so now that we're doing much more online, I think it's becoming increasingly important to really level up your audio visual game and present yourself as best as you possibly could. Just like if you were speaking at a real life event, maybe to hundreds or thousands of people, you'd dress nicely, you'd do your hair if you had any hair, you might do your makeup, whatever else, to present yourself in the best possible light so that your message could really come across to the audience and that you don't negatively detract from your message. So instead of talking a lot more, let me show you exactly what I've set up. Come with me. Now, one of the first things you want to be aware of when you're setting up an environment for live streaming or podcasting or recording of any kind is the acoustics. So how does it sound naturally, basically? So I'm in my office, and in my office we've got a lot of very smooth surfaces, so hardwood floors, walls, glass, and so I used to get terrible echo in this room. It sounded really bad when I was recording, and so getting that addressed is super important. So that's the reason I've installed these sound absorbing panels, and I'll show you those in a bit more detail in a moment. But I think the sound component is incredibly important. And yes, there is post-production editing in some instances, but in a lot of instances, like if you're on a Zoom call or if you're live streaming or whatever, you're not going to have a chance to edit the audio and video, and it's just going to sound really bad. Now, people will sit through poor video, but bad audio is just a nightmare to listen through and sit through, and so it will really detract from your message. And I remember reading a study that said people actually perceive you as less intelligent when there are bad audio issues. So of course, you don't want to have those things against you when you're live streaming or recording or any of those sorts of things. So what you're going to want to do is make sure that the sound in the room acoustically is pretty good. And so I'll show you a little bit about what I've done on that aspect. Now we're here in my office, and we'll go to the studio in just a moment, but what I wanted to show you is here we've got a lot of smooth surfaces. So you'll see there's hardwood floors, there were just bare walls, there was just glass, and so I had a major reverberation problem. So what I did is I got these sound treatment panels installed. You can get these very cheaply and easily on eBay and just stick them up yourself. I got a contractor just to help me out with that and get them all stuck on the wall. I put down a rug as well. That really helps with the reverberation. There's nothing much I can do about the windows without covering them, and obviously I don't want to do that. So what I did is I did the best that I possibly could here, and it's done a really good job. So we've got these sound treatment panels, we've got the rug. I've also put some sound treatment on the ceiling as well. So you'll notice I've got here a whole bunch of lights as well so that the lighting comes out. Like I said, this is not my studio, this is my office. And so it's a very minimalist setup. It's quite separate to the studio, but again, what I wanted to demonstrate was the sound treatment that we've done here, which you'll likely need to do in your own studio if you've got smooth surfaces. So let's head to the studio and I'll show you how I've set that up. Now you'll see here behind me is my studio setup. Now I've set up a separate studio to my office. I like to keep my office super minimalist. There's just a desk and my computer, and that's it. And I use that for my writing, for my reflective thinking, for meetings with my team, and so on and so forth. And so I keep that super minimalist. Whereas the studio is kind of a little bit messy. There's cables everywhere, there's equipment everywhere, there's lights and all of that sort of thing. Now, I suspect that most people will want their studio and their office to be in the one location, and that's totally fine. That really makes sense. I just had this spare room in the back of my house, and I thought it'd be cool to set up a separate studio so that I can just walk in, press a couple of buttons, and start content creation. So that's what I've done, and I'll show you around my studio setup right now. So you'll notice in here I've got this big shaggy rug because, again, I've got these smooth surfaces with hardwood floors. I've got curtains hanging down in here, so that absorbs a lot of the audio and reverberation. So I've taken care of the reverberation issue here. There's no problem here like there was in my office. And so that's kind of taken care of. The next thing I want you to see is I've set up a podium or a little sort of mini stand-up desk. Now, the reason that I've done that is because I think you can have much better energy standing up, because when you're sitting down, you sometimes kind of just shut down a little bit, you're concentrating a little less. And again, I'm speaking to groups, I'm speaking to people, and I want to create the kind of performance that I would if I was there in real life. So I think you get better energy from standing up and having a stand-up desk. Now, if you're combining your studio with your office all in one, you can get sit-stand desks where you can either manually or through a motor adjust your desk. I highly recommend standing when you're creating content and video and all of that, because I think you're going to have better energy. I think you're going to find it easier to breathe and deliver the kind of performance that you would if you were there in real life. Now, the next thing I want to show you is this little black box here. Now, what that is it's called an uninterruptible power supply, or UPS. What that basically means is if the power goes out, this will keep things running for, I think, about 15 or 20 minutes. Now, they're not terribly expensive. They're a few $100s, but the worst thing that can happen if you're in the middle of an hour webinar or something like that and you have a power outage for whatever reason, is to basically your computer resets or your camera disconnects or whatever. And so for the peace of mind of a few $100s, I think this is well worth it. The other thing that this does is it gives you clean power. So normally the mains power coming from the street, sometimes we'll have brownouts, you might have power surges and things like that. So it protects your expensive equipment, because some of this equipment is reasonably expensive, as I'll show you in just a moment. It's not all super crazy expensive, but again, I don't want my equipment being damaged by power surges and all of that sort of stuff. And I don't want to lose connection with my audience in the middle of a presentation because of a power interruption. So that's one thing. The next thing you'll notice is I'm plugging in directly into a wired socket there for my internet. I don't use Wi-Fi to connect when I'm on a webinar or when I'm live on a podcast or something like that. The reason I don't want to use Wi-Fi is because Wi-Fi is subject to interference, and again, I don't want something external blocking my ability to communicate with my audience, and so I use a wired connection, and I actually disable the Wi-Fi on my laptop when I'm about to broadcast. So if you've got the option of a wired internet connection, plugging directly into your internet router or your internet service provider rather than using Wi-Fi, definitely do that, again, because you don't want Wi-Fi interference issues. So that's the power setup, and that's the internet setup. Next, I want to show you what I've got here from a microphone perspective. So I'm using a Shure MV7, I believe, and so I've also got the bigger, I'm not sure what they call this, I think they call it a pop filter. Again, you'll have to forgive me because I'm not an expert videographer or audiovisual person at all. I kind of know a little bit here or there, and I've had some friends who know much more about this stuff who've advised me. But I've got a bigger pop filter so that when I say words like p and k and t and all of that, it doesn't create that kind of popping audio sound. So it's the Shure MV7, and then I've got a larger pop filter. Now, I've got a laptop here that I use purely for two reasons: for creating podcasts, for my studio, and then I use it for travel as well. So that's separate from my day-to-day desktop, but again, you can combine those. I find it's easier that if I need to create some content or whatever, everything's just ready there, set up, and I can press the record button. Now, you'll notice there's a bunch of equipment that we need to plug into the laptop. So there's this microphone, there's the camera, which I'll show you in just a moment. There's lighting, there's internet, there's all sorts of stuff. And so I've got this Thunderbolt, I think they call them a Thunderbolt hub or Thunderbolt switch, something like that. And so all the equipment plugs into there, so that into the laptop, I can literally just plug in one cable. I don't have to have a ton of cables and power supplies and inputs and all of that. So literally one cable goes into the laptop. Everything else plugs into this little hub and stays permanently plugged in. So then if I need to take this laptop somewhere, I literally unplug one cable and I'm off. Now, next, let me show you the lights. So these are studio lights. Again, I'm not a lighting expert or any kind of video or camera expert at all. I asked my friend who's an expert what lights I should get, and I just got what he recommended. So it's a box light that sits on its own stand. So I've got a little stand there, and I turn that on when I come into the studio to record. Now, this I think is the absolute most important component in this whole setup. This is what's called a beam splitter and a teleprompter setup. So you'll see this is where I'm pointing here. This is a piece of glass that I look into. It's at eye level, so I've now got my phone kind of right at eye level, and behind this piece of glass is where my camera sits. So let me show you that. So you'll see that the camera actually sits behind this little hood and behind this piece of glass there. And here is a screen that reflects onto this glass. So why this is important is, so I'll show you. So if I want to, if I can be looking straight at this screen. So for example, let me show you this. So if I move this window here, so you can see I'm moving the window. So I've actually got a screen that I'm looking at. So usually this is, if I'm on a Zoom call, this will be the other person's face that I'm communicating with. And so I can look them straight in the eye, and I'm looking straight at the camera. You'll notice very often when you're on a Zoom call, if you're looking at the person, they will perceive you kind of looking down or up or not straight at them. Whereas with a beam splitter, you can be looking straight at the person and straight at the camera at the same time. And I think that's super, super important, because particularly if you're doing presentations or any kind of podcast interview or whatever, you want to have that eye-to-eye contact wherever possible. So I use this device. It's a beam splitter. This one is by a company called People Prompter. Now this one has a built-in screen which plugs straight into the USB hub or Thunderbolt hub or whatever it is, and so that way it can take a feed directly into the laptop, and I can use it as a second screen, and I can have that eye-to-eye contact, which is super, super important. Now, like I said, behind this beam splitter, I've got my camera. My camera is a Sony A6400, and look, I don't know anything about SLR cameras or photography or videography. I basically got the camera that was recommended to me. This is an excellent camera, and what I like about it is that it's got a lot of the auto setup, so I don't have to worry about all of those camera terms and F this and F that, and I basically set it to auto, and then I've got the video feed of the camera going into this device. It's called an Elgato Cam Link. And this device, the Elgato Cam Link, is what brings the video feed into my laptop. So that's what brings the video feed directly into my laptop. And so again, I can use now an SLR camera as my video device, as my camera that I'm using. And it makes you look great. It creates that depth of field effect. So like you're seeing here, so it kind of blurs out the background a little bit and has you in focus. And from a video perspective, there's almost nothing that will make you look as good as an SLR camera. I think that's super, super important. So I think we've covered most of the devices. The only other thing I've got here is a stand for an iPhone. So this is a camera stand, and this will actually hold an iPhone. And what I use that for is so that I have a second camera that's recording from another angle. In photography terms or videography terms, this is called a B-roll. So basically this can be a second video feed that you're recording, and so you can switch from one to the other, and it kind of makes it so that it's not so boring, so that you're not looking at the same thing all the time. So I basically slot in my iPhone. I don't have it in now because I've got my iPhone in my hand, because I'm showing you what's going on here. So that's essentially my little studio setup. Like I said, I'm certainly not an expert at video or audio or any of those things, but this is what I've found works really, really well for me. This is my little studio setup, and like I said, I think the key component here is this thing, the teleprompter and beam splitter. And like I said, I bought this one. This was slightly expensive. I think it's somewhere around $2,000, but you can get much, much cheaper ones. You can get ones where you get this beam splitter glass separately, and instead of a built-in monitor, you can use an iPad or some other device, and so then it's much, much cheaper. But from my perspective, I wanted a setup that would make me look great, and I wanted something that I would feel comfortable presenting like I would in person. So I wanted something that would make me look good and that would make me come across professionally to an audience. So I hope that's helpful. That's my little studio setup, and I'd love to see what you set up as well. Bye for now.